Dr. Leventhal is the director of the Penn Cultural Heritage Center, as well as a curator in the American section here in the museum, and professor of anthropology in the Department of Anthropology. He's also the former Williams director of the Penn Museum. Richard came to the University of Pennsylvania in 2004 to take up the responsibility of being director of the museum, and from a fine background in Maya studies, archaeology, but has broadened his intellectual and scholarly pursuits in recent years to really look more critically and thoughtfully at how cultural heritage, broadly speaking, is interpreted and presented in public museums such as ours, as well as in the intellectual life of academia and public rhetoric about, personal and collective identity of communities and ethnic groups. His current work is, in fact, a relatively new project focused on the history of northern Yucatan in Mexico, the Caste War, which was a pivotal moment in the history of Mexico and for the Maya people of Yucatan. And he has been quite active in working with the individuals within Quintana Roo and in various major cities in northern Yucatan about how the Caste War connects with or is separate from how contemporary Maya people see themselves, how they see themselves as Mexican citizens, how Mexico sees itself as a very multifaceted society. I also wanted to let you know Richard also will be speaking this evening for the Penn Science Cafe. So at 7 o'clock, he'll be up at 40th and Walnut?
Mar Bar, right?
At the Mar Bar, yes, at 40th and Walnut, second floor above the Marathon Grill. There's the Penn Science Cafe this evening, so Richard will be regaling an audience there as well. But without further ado, Richard, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And tonight's talk is not the same as this one, so if you're interested in hearing about, the title of that talk I think is Stealing History, and it's about museums in the 21st century and the issues of antiquities and acquisitions by private collectors and museums. But this one that I want to focus on today is really examining cultural heritage, specifically in Mexico, and beginning to really try to think about how I can begin to implement, along with a group of people in Mexico, a cultural heritage project. Meaning I can theorize about cultural heritage, I can talk about cultural heritage, now I want to do it. And so what I'm trying to do here is to implement and involve a lot of people and a lot of ideas in this new project. And it is about preserving the Maya past. Now, when we think about preserving the Maya past, you usually think about the ancient Maya. You usually think about a place like Palenque or like Tikal. These are the types of images that might come to mind when you think about the Maya past. Or you might begin to see, and this is just around the site, the modern day city of Chetumal, a statue, a family, a Maya family, an ancient Maya family on the way into Chetumal, and perhaps on the way out. I think, if I remember correctly, they took a photograph of that large signboard that talks about Chichen Itza. Now I've got one. And really about the Yucatan and trying to sell it as a tourist destination. Again, these are the fairly typical images. On the streets of, and is in fact a very small town of Felipe Carrillo Puerto, one begins to see again images of the Maya, ancient Maya people with monuments, with buildings, with pyramids in the background. One brings us up to date in sort of a modern vision of Chichen Itza with a variety of these carvings. And then this one here with a profile of a man here, profile of a woman here. I'm really not sure what's going on in the middle of that one, whether this is sort of this new steampunk approach to things, really what's going on in terms of the brains of these two people that are in profile. I'll leave that one to you. But this is some of the sort of imagery that one begins to see as one is wandering around in that part of the world. And these are images that are being done by Maya people looking at their past in some sense. At the same time, one of the big issues that I am confronting is how do you stop the destruction of these pyramids? How do you just stop the looting of the pyramids? And I'll talk more about that tonight, but I will talk just a little bit about this today, because here you can see, excuse me, a trench that was illegally excavated into the middle of this relatively small pyramid out in the jungle. And all the white stone on both sides has recently been excavated out, not by archaeologists, and the stuff basically taken out of there. If they had found a tomb or they had found a cache of objects, all of those objects removed and then put onto the black market. And just to give you another example of this, of a site called Dos Pilas in Guatemala, Stela 14, this is what it looked like before it was literally cut up and it was sitting on a set up and preserved today. This is after people came along, they had cut this section out. This is a bound captive with, you can see his knee here, his feet up here. He is on his stomach, his face is here. This is a bound captive being stood upon by the ruler from Dos Pilas. Somebody came along and cut the bottom section off. These then end up in museums, being sold to individuals or to museums around the world. Just to give you a sense of another site called El Peru, at the Cleveland Museum, if you look very carefully, you can see the cut lines right here, and then it got shattered up at the top. And Cleveland bought this as one piece, but it came out in pieces from Guatemala. The same thing you can begin to see here, some of the cut lines that occur. Here, some of them are done slightly better, or the preservation is slightly better. But what we're seeing is museums buying things that relate to the ancient past of the Maya. In terms of heritage, however, we can't really see necessarily that preservation takes place in an absolute sense by the people who are living there, by the Maya people today, their direct descendants. And here's a site in southern Belize that I worked at back in 1983. Carved monuments on the ground. This is the first time it was being cleared. A very beautiful, fairly early part of the, the middle part of the early classic time period. Really quite impressive in terms of its carving. Won't go into the details of that. But take that 15 years later, 1998, the protective huts over the monuments were burned down. That monument that I just showed you with the beautiful carving this is what it looks like today. And somebody wrote on one of the monuments, clearly indicating their vision of the preservation, why these things are important or not. And in fact, there's lots of thought about why something like this would happen in a place like Bushbenka. And in fact, what oftentimes this relates to both the relationship between the people of the village nearby, this ancient site, and the central government. I mean, the fuck you is very much focused on to the central government and their representation of what's going on. Part of the concept of representation, part of the concept of preservation, is also focused upon the Maya as something like this, as traditional people, people who are part of both the past and in some sense the present, but in a very traditional way. If I use the word traditional, I could also use the word primitive. And so this is some of the things that I think people are interested in trying to preserve. At the same time, if you go into Mexico today, the Maya are not just sitting back and dancing very nicely, as I just showed you in that slide, but rather, in fact, are rebelling against Mexico. And this is not the first time they've rebelled against Mexico. So on January 1st, 1994, the Zapatistas announced themselves in Chiapas, and they were led by Subcomandante Marcos. And this is a time when the Maya are rebelling today, from 1994, and they continue to rebel all the way up to the present day in this section of Mexico. And there are parts of Chiapas that these people control and parts that the government controls, and every so often there are minor skirmishes between the two. But this is not the first rebellion, and in fact, these people connect themselves very directly back to the stuff that I'm working on, which is just a little bit earlier. But before we get there, we also have to talk about the economic importance of Maya heritage in terms of both tourism and the basic selling of material and goods to tourists. So in a place like Chichen Itza, where there are well over 1 million tourists go there every year, it's one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. There was a huge bump as it became one of the 8 great wonders, modern day wonders of the world, or 7 great modern day wonders of the world. This was voted on by people online. So we have tourists who are going there. We also have the Maya people who are selling at the site. And the interesting thing here that's happened is the Maya people have pushed themselves and moved into the site itself. And so they are selling goods and trinkets right up to the edge of the ancient monuments. So that the economic value of this is very, very clear. When one begins to talk to them about, does this hurt their past? Is this connection of trying to sell things and trying to, in some sense, sometimes harass tourists, trying to sell things while they are visiting the Maya past, when I and other people have talked to them, generally I think it comes out that their commentary is, no, we're trying to sell, we're trying to focus on our economic needs in the present day. And so, in many respects, what I found in coming down into this Yucatan area of Mexico was the fact that the Maya in this section, and I've actually seen this in Belize, are not focused upon their heritage as being the ancient Maya. They really don't care about the ancient Maya. They see it as part of their economic modern day world. They see it as value because they are able to make money from them. Some people occasionally talk about the connection to the past. I see that as a very political statement, very powerful political statement. But what I see happening over and over again is the lack of interest of the modern day people to the ancient people. That's something that we bring to the table, and I'd say we Americans, people from Mexico City perhaps, Mexicans, not the Maya themselves. And in fact, it was very interesting when I first came into this region, and I was working in this place called Tiasuco, right in this sort of just south of Valladolid by about 60 kilometers. What was happening is when I would go into the village and I'd sit and talk with people, and I would say who I was. I was an archaeologist, but I'm interested in studying the past and talking about this rebellion that I'm going to talk to you about in just a second. They seemed incredibly happy to tell me about the ancient Maya sites nearby. They would take me out there. I will bet they would have sold me stuff. I don't think they cared. However, it took me months of talk in these communities before they would take me to these Caste War sites. I kept going back to the Caste War. I kept going back to this rebellion time period only 150 years ago, and they didn't want to talk about it with me. So it took me a lot longer to get them to feel trusted, that I was a trustworthy individual, for them to show me some of the things that I'm going to show you today. And we've now developed a project. So I see more and more that the people who live around Felipe Carrillo Puerto, that was originally called Chan Santa Cruz, and I'll talk about that in just a second. The people who live here were much more focused as their heritage upon the rebellious time period of 150 years ago, 160 years ago, than they were about the ancient Maya. So in fact, as you drive into what is now called Felipe Carrillo Puerto, Chan Santa Cruz was the center of this rebellion that started in 1847. It was the center of the rebellion, and as you drive in, you see a sign that says the martyrs of the Maya Social War, 1847. That's another word. That's another name for it, the Guerra Social Maya. And at the same time, in one of the government buildings is a beautiful wall painting. I mean, it's a big, massive painting that says the Maya Zone is not an ethnographic museum. It is a community that's moving forward. And it's therefore, they're very aware that anthropologists go down there, they're very aware that archaeologists go down there, they're very aware of tourists going down there. And they are more interested in defining who they are than letting us define who they are. One of the most sacred shrines of this time period, of this rebellious time period, is the sanctuary of the Talking Cross. The Caste War starts in 1847. And I'm going to show you actually where it starts in just a few minutes. And the Maya begin to win the battle over the next several years. But around 1849 or so, they begin to lose, and they're being pushed back by the armies of Mexico. And in 1850, there is an apparition. And their apparition is a cross at this shrine that talks to them and says, this is what you will do, and this is how you will win the war. And what they do, in fact, is they then begin this advance, and they, in fact, almost advance all the way to Merida, and almost take over this region to create, in fact, a new country. In the end, they don't. But this is where the Talking Cross was. And this is the shrine of the talking cross here. The shrine was mostly destroyed except for the back wall. The back wall is here. This is the only image I have. You're not allowed to take a picture inside. Therefore, I would not take a picture since they asked me not to. This I got online. Somebody must have paid somebody off to take the picture of the shrine, so I will show that. But that's the most sacred spot for the Maya today of this region, because this, in fact, is where the talking cross was. That talking cross is not there. You can't see it. I can't see it. It's not there now. Where is it? Whether it was lost, whether it was destroyed, or whether it's been moved to another place. There are 5 sacred ceremonial centers in this region. This is just one of them. Gringos and tourists are allowed into this. You have to take your shoes off. You have to be quite reverent when you do. But you cannot go into these other 4 centers are sacred, and you cannot walk in. And they say you're not allowed to. I've driven by and I've seen the places. But you can't walk into these, and it's quite possible that one of these other places, I think I know which one, might have the cross. So this is one of the most sacred spots for the Maya. This is, in fact, the shrine. It's quite small. Only the back wall is original. And every day, there are men and women there protecting this location because they don't trust the government to do it. And there is the general who is in charge of this ceremonial center, and under him he has his colonels and lieutenants, and it's a military structure which goes back to the Caste War, and the general says who will come in each week to protect the shrine. And so this is the continuity of the Caste War as it moves into the present day. And these people are there every day to open it up and to be protecting their sacred space. As it turns out, I was able to work with them a little bit. Here's the shrine in the back. There is a cenote there. There is a natural cenote, sacred cenote, where in fact the talking cross was supposed to have come out of. And that cenote has gotten completely backed up with dirt, and they asked if we could help them develop a process of cleaning it out and then figuring out how to keep the dirt out of it. So we were able to arrange that to provide a little bit of money for them. And then the next project that we're going to do is to try to work with them to create a small museum at the site. It's going to be their museum, not my museum, but it is going to be something that we're going to try to help them with and figure out how to present their past and their culture. And here is the cenote up front that's completely filled in right now. They're in the process right now of cleaning it out and setting it up. Now nearby is the town of Tepiche. The town of Tepiche was where one of the leaders of the Caste War, of this rebellion, was born, Cecilio Chi. And again, the Maya put up this statue there. It was paid for, I assume, by the government, but the Maya put this up. And then where he is buried, he was killed during the Caste War. He is buried behind the church, and they do have a plaque up for him there. This is very unusual in any of these towns. And then the community that I want to work in, that I am starting to work in, is a place called Teosuco. And in Teosuco is, first of all, there's a museum of the Caste War. It's their own museum that they have created. It's on the right-hand side here. There's no big sign outside. But there is a Caste War museum there. And in the back is the church. And again, over and over again, this is the place that they identify as being in something that's the very center of this rebellion. But in many respects, Teosuco is occupied today. It was occupied at that time. And what I'm going to show you in just a few minutes is a second town nearby. And what I've gotten from the people in this community is the fact that the second town was the one that was occupied by the Maya just before the rebellion, and then abandoned as war went back and forth. And Teosuco was actually occupied by the Mexicans and the Spanish. And so you had these 2 different towns based upon who you were, where you lived. Today, everyone's living in Teosuco. It's a Maya community still. This is the result of the Caste War, this destruction of the church. They've left this end open, and it's really rather stunning and rather surprising in its representation. Sorry. And then in 2002, they had a 161st anniversary of the Caste War, the Guerra Social Maya, and this was something that they do every year to celebrate and to discuss the issues related to the Caste War. Within the museum, I just want to show you a couple of things. It's really quite stunning. It's beautiful. And this is a museum that probably gets probably 30 people a week and probably 5 gringos a week of that 30, maybe, if they're lucky. Meaning 5 paying people and the rest of this local part of the community. Many people from Teosuco come in. It's a sort of a community center. But of other people around, of Mexicans and so on, there's not a huge flood moving in that direction, but you can begin to see it's a beautiful old hacienda building that's been restored, and wonderful paintings and murals and discussion of the Caste War as they perceived it. Images of the Guerra Social Maya, of the Caste War, with the leaders of the rebellion as they're represented there. Wonderful discussions of the causes of the Caste War, and I still like dioramas. And it's a wonderful little diorama showing some of the Maya people being killed. This is the guys in the uniform are the Mexican military. This is the battle, and this is how they've represented it. However, to me, the most interesting is, in fact, the last room in this museum, because it's the community room. It's not the room set up by the museum. But it's the community room, and these are all the artifacts, most of them related to the Caste War, that have been found by the people in this community and simply brought in. As they were farming and so on, they brought them in, and they're simply displayed on a table. And in the back is a small bust and a skull. And here's the skull and here's the bust. And this is one of the leaders of the rebellion, Bernardino Ken, and this is how he is represented. And this is his skull. The skull had been removed from the community and then was brought back eventually and is now on display. So there's no fear or concern about displaying people, even 150 years ago, human remains, because this, in fact, is their heritage. They're very happy to have him displayed there. So if you're looking at, let me just use this now. This is Teosuco. This is the main road from Felipe Carrillo Puerto coming up to the north. Teosuco is right here, and this continues up to Valladolid. And then on the Valladolid east-west is Cancun on the east, and Chichen Itza and Merida on the west. This is the small community of Teosuco. There's a small farming road that heads out here to the south. It splits here. One continues off in this direction. Another road continues here. And in fact, the community that I was taken to is right out here. It's abandoned. I'll show you pictures of it. It's an abandoned town, probably 5,000 people. I have no idea yet what the size is. That was here. This is the community with the church and everything that was occupied probably around 1847, and then sometime during the war abandoned, still trying to figure out exactly which town this is, what the name of it was, and so on. And then right down here at the end of this road, right in this area, is the hacienda of one of the leaders of the rebellion, simultaneously occupied as this community was. And this is, in fact, the starting point for the rebellion. And in fact, that hacienda was owned by and occupied by Jacinto Pat, one of the leaders of the rebellion. This is a drawing of him. There are no photographs of him that we know of. And then again, in Teosuco, the town that he grew up in, nearby, is in fact the statue. And he is very famous for not only starting the Caste War, and he started the Caste War by having the leaders come to his hacienda, Chulam Beach, and eventually deciding that they needed to begin to bring other people in even, and writing a letter to Cecilio Chi that I just showed you, his statue, and saying we need to start this rebellion in some sense. He was also very famous for using machete in battle. And he was very famous for cutting off limbs and using it to kill people on the Mexican side. Now this is not a statue made out of bronze. This is fiberglass. But what they did is they painted the edge of his machete as if they had sharpened it, so that in fact this is Jacinto Pat ready to go to battle with the sharpened machete to go cut off limbs, heads, and to win the battle. And again, this is how they are representing themselves. Just wanted to show you my 3 co-principal investigators The four of us are in this together. Other than when I apply for a permit in Mexico and I cannot have anybody but one name on it, and they only want my name, these guys are going to decide what the project is as much as I am. And this is Eladio Pat, Carlos Chan, who's the director of the museum, and Freddy Balam. And these are three men in Tiasuco who are interested in the heritage, and knew about these places. And as I say, I've been talking to them for weeks or months before they actually took me to these places. In the back is one of the doorways to Jacinto Pat's hacienda. The roof is down. It's very hard to see. This is the part of the interior of the main building. There are multiple buildings around. It was a farming hacienda, had cattle. He was a fairly wealthy man, but this is the inside with the doorway here and another doorway that's fallen apart, going to another section of the house. And I apologize, we haven't started to clear. It's going to be very hard to see some of the things I'm going to try to show you. But this is the main entrance to the hacienda. That's still preserved, this big arch that's still preserved, and I hope we can preserve it. That is the main carriage entrance as you would drive up to the place. There is the arch on the left. This is the passageway that one would walk through. And I want to talk about this in just a second, because as you look at this, you can see the wall extending across and the big arch here. And there's something that's sticking out here that's part of this passageway through, this doorway through. And what we begin to see is, in fact, that these things, these round curved elements, were added later. And it's quite likely that they were added at the time of the Caste War, because this is fairly typical of narrowing the entrance, being able to place somebody right in the middle, probably with a gun, and to make sure that nobody's approaching this entrance who shouldn't be. And so we actually begin to see very simply with the architecture here the nature of the Caste War as they're beginning to fight and try to define who they are and who the Mexicans are. And that's part of what I'm interested in, is how in this moment of rebellion is the moment when people are talking about who they are and who they are not. And that's really what I want to begin to focus upon. How do they define themselves? What are the ways they define themselves? And so we want to look at towns like Lalca, which is this outlying town that I mentioned to you, or the hacienda of Jacinto Pat. Now Lalca is this other town that I mentioned. It's not occupied today. They do go there one day a year for the festival associated with the church that I'm going to show you. As you enter the town, it is defined by crosses along the path, and I mean every path. And we were on multiple paths all around in this jungle area, and every path, every time we got to the edge, we would find a cross, or the cross would be pointed out to us. So that defines the entrance. This is the downtown of Lalca, and again, I apologize, it's a lot of green looking in the jungle. Here is a well and a cross, and I just have a close-up of these two over here. This is the central plaza, with the church on one side and a series of other large buildings such as this on the other side. And again, this is a building on this plaza, we're just off the plaza, dated to about 1840, 1850, in that range, that's completely abandoned, and has been sitting there for about 150, 160 years. The church is, again, abandoned. The roof is collapsed in completely. This is one end of the church. This is the altar here. This is a church to Michael the Archangel, and at the end of September is the feast day for him, and they do have a big feast out there. Everyone goes out. I've not been to that festival yet. I hope to get to it sometime in the next couple of years. Sometime, I think, the end of September. But it is well known for some paintings around the altar. The Archangel is shown here in a weaving, and they leave this alone. Nobody goes out there unless they're allowed to or taken out there by somebody. This is the church from the outside. You can see the altar is here to the left. It extends up at this end really quite high, and the walls extend off in that direction. Now, what we found is that we were able to quite literally see all the roads and the walls that define the roads for this entire community. And it's very hard here, and Eladio is sitting here for scale, and I told him that I needed him for scale. But if you look very carefully, and I apologize, there is a wall here that extends off in that direction. There's another wall over here that's extending off. This is the central road as you come in. On both sides are house plot walls. There are walls that define the house plots for individual families. There are walls that define houses. There are walls that define a series of other things. And there's another street coming here. There's a street that's coming here. And I'm standing really on the edge of the main street as it comes into the town. So one is able to see a whole series of these streets. And here we're beginning to follow one out. This is one side of it. Here's another side of it here, and it just extends off into the jungle. I'll show you what we mapped just very briefly. And again, just a series of walls that relate to both houses and buildings. Now, when we were there, and I've overlaid this on Google Earth, I took a series of points, and you can see that, in fact, we parked the car here, that's the end of this road. I walked in and then we walked out in a variety of directions. We followed one of the roads out, fairly straight road right out to there. That's where that very first cross was that I showed you. This road is about a kilometer and a half down to the center of the town. There's another series of roads about 3/4 of a kilometer extending out in that direction. Another about a half a kilometer here, and we never got further to the south in that direction. And all I was doing is taking a variety of GPS points, trying to get a sense of just the size and scale of this thing. And here we are, the various members of this project. And the key point for me is that this is a project that is not going to be an archaeologist walking in and deciding what the heritage is, what the history of the site is, and so on, but rather a community project, I hope, between, this is Eladio, I'm right there. This individual is the head of the Ejido. The Ejido is the land organization that runs this. The Ejido started after the Mexican Revolution to move land from the hacienda owners to the people. In fact, he is probably more powerful than the mayor of the town. And so we sat down with him. Carlos Chan was taking the picture. Freddie was not there that day. But what we were doing is having a conversation about what we were providing to them, what they were providing to us, what this really was in terms of a community project, so that it's not a one-sided project, as I think archaeological projects have tended to be over the years. And we have come up with a variety of activities. We're going to have a Cultural Heritage Day, where we're going to have kids coming out to one of these sites and looking at it. Well, they'll be told stories by the elders of the community. We're going to have an exhibit at the museum. We're going to have daily photographs and daily updates on what we're doing in terms of the map. The idea is to make this very integrated into the community. We'll be living in the community. And it will benefit the community, I hope, along two fronts. Obviously along or maybe three fronts. Obviously along the front of, we'll bring small amounts of money in to hire some of the men to do some work for us. But I think most importantly, it will hopefully help in terms of the perspective of cultural heritage. What is cultural heritage? What do they want to save in terms of the cultural heritage? What do they think the importance of this is? And then the third one is something that we have to think about quite a bit, which will be the question of tourism. How do you bring money into this small community that not more than 5 or 10 foreigners, and I mean foreigners from this community, Mexicans or gringos, end up in this community? How do you bring money into this? How do you make it sustainable, that heritage is sustainable? And in some sense, what the conversations that we have had pan out along two fronts. One is to say, we can't necessarily connect those two. We need to think about why heritage is important. Why do they want to save Lalca or Chulumpiche? Why is it important for them? And then secondly, can we connect that to an economic viable model? And I don't know if the second will work. The first one I'm sure we cannot figure out as we move forward. The second one is going to be much more complicated, because it will involve the millions and millions and millions of tourists who go to Cancun and the Maya Riviera every year, and trying to figure out how not to get everybody coming, but to get a small set of those people that's under control and is interested in something like the Caste War and rebellion. So we are working very closely with the community. I'm spending more time talking to the community than I am doing archaeology. And in fact, the day I left, and I couldn't come over because I hadn't scheduled this until after I was there, the Ejido that has 800 members, and he is in charge, the 800-member Ejido met, 300 people were there, and they were talking about several things, including our project, and only 3 people spoke apparently quite vaguely about not wanting to do the project, while everyone else voted in favor of it. So 297 to 3 isn't a bad initial start. It's not going to stay there. I'm sure our positive ratings will go down in the community at different times as we hire certain people and not others. But these are the guys who will be in the community and be in charge, really, of how we connect to that community in an active way. They are principal investigators. They're not just my foreman or something like that. They are active participants in the development of this project. And so I apologize to you. I haven't done the project yet. There's more set up to this project than one could ever believe. It's not just going to the government and saying, give me a permit, I'm going to go dig. This is weeks and weeks, if not months, of talking to the community. I've spent maybe 5 days at these 2 sites, these historic sites. But now, if all goes well and the money's already in place, we will start in mid-May or 3rd week in May to go down there, a small team for about 6 weeks, to begin the process of working in this community. And we'll see what happens, but they will call the shots. At the end of the project this year, they will decide if we get to go back or not the government. I need a permit from the government, and they will decide at one level, but I don't think that's a problem. Because the government, interestingly, doesn't care about historic stuff. So the government is more or less said, do what you want. You need a permit, get a permit, we'll give it to you. It's these people who are living there that really count. And their heritage is tied to rebellions, and rebellion against Mexico, which is continuing in this area today with these ceremonial centers. It's continuing with the Zapatista movement. It's about rebellion and not giving in to Mexico, at the same time acknowledging that they are part of Mexico. So I hope to have an update for you in about a year, maybe 6 months. But right now, this is the beginning of what I see as a very complex but exciting community development project for the cultural heritage of the Yucatan. Thank you.